modules, Embedding QSEN Competencies in Prelicensure Curricula, Fostering Continuous Improvement. In this module, I'll explore ways we can create curricula that readily adapt to changes in science, technology, the needs of patients and families, and the emerging healthcare system. We'll examine how improvement processes can facilitate ongoing transformation in nursing education, and I'll point to resources that can support the continued transformation that we seek as we better prepare students to provide safe, quality care. As you know, when the Quality and Safety Education for Nurses project began in 2005, the goal was to alter nurses' professional identity, so that when we think of what it means to be a respected nurse, we think not only of caring, knowledge, honesty, and integrity, but also the commitment to the development and assessment of quality and safety competencies. Now that's a bold goal, isn't it? And yet today there's a great deal of energy nationally for developing and testing ways to assist students to achieve these competencies. Although this is the end of the faculty learning modules, it's also a new beginning, isn't it? The QSEN website continues to provide a wealth of support for faculties and schools seeking to embed QSEN competencies across courses, curricula, and programs. I hope you'll continue taking advantage of these resources and that you'll add new teaching strategies that you've created to the website to share with others. You'll find consultants who can help you as you continue on this journey. You can find annotated bibliographies, video presentations, information about conferences that can help you as you continue in your efforts to embed QSEN competencies in your curriculum. Because really, as we think about it, our journey to better prepare students to provide safe, quality care is only just beginning. As practice continues to evolve, we'll have to remain ever vigilant that our courses and curricula stay current and reflect the complexities in which students learn and practice. Indeed, the Institute of Medicine report on the future of nursing challenges us to create curricula that are adaptive enough to undergo continuous evaluation and improvement based on new evidence and a changing science base, changes and advances in technology, and changes in the needs of patients and the healthcare system. In the abstract, it's pretty easy to agree with statements such as this. And yet when we stop and think about it, just how adaptive are we? Is our curriculum able to adapt quickly to changes that we encounter in practice, in the science that underpins practice and the needs of patients and families in the healthcare system? Traditionally, we spent several years in the process of reforming curriculum. We painstakingly select and sequence content and learning experiences throughout it. We plan carefully for its implementation. Once we've accomplished that curriculum reform, no one is too anxious to begin again. In fact, for many of us, isn't initiating a curriculum change something that we really dread, we want to avoid? If we don't have to, let's wait. Becomes a common way of thinking about curriculum. So, creating curricula that can rapidly adapt to changes is a challenge for us. Perhaps a way for us to begin is to shift our thinking from changing the curriculum to the changing curriculum. Let's consider for a moment what that would look like. One way to begin might be to think about curricular design as more emergent, that draws readily on what we know about the complexity of practice, what the discipline is being challenged to do with the IOM report, the Carnegie study, and others. It draws on diverse pedagogical thinking and experiences in the literature that describes these. It also draws on our collective wisdom, the wisdom of both teachers and clinicians in terms of thinking about preparing the next generation for practice. What would such a curriculum look like? Let's consider an example. Traditionally, when we think about curriculum change, we think about the content we need to add, what content we could put in one course or another or at another level, so that we could figure out ways to fit more content in. So when we look at documents like the AACN Essentials or the QSEN Competencies or other frameworks we might use, we think about mapping those content items throughout the curriculum. An assumption in this approach is that if we cover it, students will learn it and be able to use that information in the future if and when the clinical situation requires it. So in the essentials, we see that one of the criteria is to implement patient and family care with respect for patient and family preferences. This is obviously congruent with the QSEN competency detailing patient-centered care in the KSAs, such as provide patient-centered care with sensitivity and respect for the diversity of human experience, and act with integrity, consistency, and respect for differing views. Most of us could identify where in our curriculum these topics are discussed, and yet, how confident are we that students have this ability when faced with complex clinical situations? How might we think about this differently? One way we could work toward an adaptive or changing curriculum is by changing the nature of the conversations we have with students. For instance, as a nurse, how would you know if a patient you were caring for felt respected or not? How do nurses exude respectfulness when encountering patients who are predators, who are racist, violent, inappropriate, non-compliant, or aggressive? Could there be times that despite my best efforts to be respectful, patients experience the opposite? How might questions such as these invite different kinds of conversations among teachers and students while they work to provide safe, quality care? Notice how different these are than the more typical emphasis on helping students understand that nurses should be respectful, that they should coordinate care based on patient preferences, values, and needs. Questions such as these engage students in thinking about who they are and how they are in relation to those for whom they provide care, and to consider the barriers of all types that get in the way of that. Thought of in this way, the curriculum shows up as the dialogue among teachers, students, and clinicians, and the meaning this dialogue has for them as nurses. In other words, thinking about the curriculum as dialogue and meaning, faculty spend their time engaging students in conversations about the complexity of practice, working together to make our practice explicit and to extend knowledge and generate more questions. But because these conversations are in and about practice, they necessarily become reflective of and relevant to the changing context in which students learn to become nurses. They allow us to adapt to changes that occur more readily because we aren't locked into a particular content map. So look at the QSEN competencies again and the KSA statements. How can you prompt different kinds of conversations with students that move beyond merely presenting these ideas as content? It's hard for us to move away from content, though, isn't it? And you might be thinking something like, well, those questions sound fine, but only with advanced students. First, students must learn the basics, or the fundamentals of nursing practice, and then we could explore some of these more complex ideas. But let's think about that for a minute. What does it mean to say something's fundamental? Clearly, as faculty, we share a common understanding of the fundamentals. We all have fundamentals classes that look largely the same. Rarely do we stop to consider if those aspects reflect our current practice. For example, for something to be fundamental, it has to be of central importance and relate to an essential function. It's the generating source of, in this case, nursing practice. Is this reflected in our fundamental courses? Well, let's consider this. In most fundamentals courses, providing personal care is considered fundamental to nursing practice. Because of this, these courses focus on bathing, oral care, feeding, positioning, bed making, and transferring. In traditional curriculum, then, it follows that because personal care is fundamental to nursing practice, clinical experiences begin with providing personal care, and typically to one patient in a non-acute setting. Sound familiar? You might recall how in Module 1, Resources, we provided an activity you could use to guide students to think about the complexity of practice they encountered and to begin developing their QSEN competencies right from the start. We considered the question, what is fundamental to future practice? What are those things that are so central to current or future practice that without them students couldn't progress to more complex ideas? For the sake of our discussion, Let's consider the possibility that these four elements are fundamental to practice. Figuring out what I know and don't know in a given situation and where to find out. Finding and evaluating evidence. Observing outcomes of care and variation across patients or in the patient's status from day to day. Examining the impact of care systems. So, how could we engage students in thinking about these aspects of practice in a fundamentals course? Now again, if we focus on changing the conversations that we have with students and our clinical colleagues, what kinds of questions could we design to engage students in thinking about that? Well, we might ask, what personal care is needed by this group of patients? Do different groups of patients have different care needs? How would you know? Has this care been provided in each case? When has it been provided? By whom? How would you know if the care provided was adequate or appropriate given the situation? What are the barriers, either real or potential, to patients receiving personal care that's needed in this setting? And last but certainly not least, how do these patients experience receiving personal care? Now, as you look at these questions as a whole, notice how much you have to know as a student to answer these. You have to know what personal care is and how to determine what each patient needs. You have to consider the variation among patients' preferences and the conditions that would suggest different or similar kinds of personal care needs. You have to look at the system to consider who's providing this, if it's reliably provided, and so forth. Importantly, notice how the patient's experience is part of these considerations, and students must engage patients in talking about these issues. It seems fair to say that these are the kinds of conversations that are much more reflective of current practice than merely demonstrating one's ability to give a bath, provide oral care, or the like. Again, the details of using this approach are provided in Module 1, Resources section. In addition, you can look at each of these questions and determine how each of the QSEN competencies has KSAs that will be addressed by engaging students in these kinds of conversations. What personal care is needed by this group of patients? Do different groups of patients have different needs? Obviously looks at patient-centered care and the use of evidence to make those kinds of decisions, meeting several of the KSAs described in the QSEN competencies. Similarly, has this care been provided in each case, when, and by whom, helps students explore issues of teamwork and collaboration and the supporting KSAs to that competency. How has this care been provided and was it adequate to the situation? Helps students begin to look at issues around quality improvement and the reliability of care, gaps between local and best practices, and so forth. Similarly, in looking to the barriers to patients receiving care, students explore issues of safety and informatics and how they might draw on that knowledge to improve care. By exploring patients' experiences intentionally as part of these conversations, students also draw on their emerging knowledge of patient-centered care and evidence-based practice, and importantly, never separating the patient's experiences from our other efforts to improve care. Of course, most of us have engaged students in activities such as these before, but usually in the final semesters when they're engaged in leadership and management courses or clinical practicum, right? So if we return to our thinking about creating adaptive curricula that reflect changes in practice, this kind of experience draws our attention to how we might turn our curriculum upside down. That is, students spend a lot of time investigating clinical phenomena, looking for and evaluating variations in outcomes, or even in how various conditions present. They consider how the system influences the care provided and the patient's experience of that care right from the start, and work toward being assigned total patient care. Might students be better able to provide safe, quality care if they got repeated practice, for instance, observing outcomes of care and or variation in that care, rather than in merely providing total patient care each shift, each semester, each year? Would this approach to thinking about curriculum help us become more adaptive? Would it help students recognize and extend how they contribute to the quality of care in a particular setting? But turning the curriculum upside down isn't the only way we can think about creating an adaptive curriculum. What if we were to make the curriculum available all at once? Consider how we might take all the lectures, slides, handouts, and other materials we have and make them available to all students all the time. One of the things we're really good at as nursing faculty is making a large amount of material accessible. We're adept at drilling down on particular clinical issues and at distilling important points out of an immense literature. This is really important to students who may have difficulty working their way through the literature or even their text when everything is important. They rely on us to help them focus on the most important points. They also rely on us to bring particular conditions to light when we share particular clinical examples, and so forth. Well, if we made all those resources available to all students, they could access the lecture on, say, hypertension as much as they needed to, or as they needed it, depending on the current clinical experiences they were having or were planning. So students who would encounter a patient with tracheostomy, before we've gotten to that particular content within current curricular structures, that is, could readily access it. Further, by recording our lectures, they can listen to them anytime, anywhere, and as many times as they want to or need to, and they can re-listen to them when it's important to do so. Importantly, this would free up time we spend with students for exploring the complexity of clinical issues or the difficulties nurses face as they provide care in particular situations. It would create time for us to think with students and clients and clinicians. It would allow us to spend time fostering clinical inquiry and learning that is focused in practice from start to finish. Would this help us be more adaptive and responsive in changes to practice, and to bring those changes immediately into our encounters with students? These are but a few of the ways that we could consider rethinking how we approach transforming our curricula as we embed QSEN competencies and KSAs in our programs. Each would help us incorporate changes in practice, new evidence, advances in technology into our courses and schools. Each would give us a different way to think about bringing the changing needs of patients and healthcare systems into our conversations. But clearly, you and your colleagues have good ideas too. So perhaps what's important is that we take seriously the challenge to be more adaptive and responsive to the healthcare system, so that we not only prepare new nurses differently, we prepare different new nurses. Nurses who see quality and safety as part of their professional identity as a nurse. And of course, this raises new questions for us to consider as we continually adapt to changes. For instance, does the order of courses matter? Could all of our courses be open or interested to anyone who wants to hear the discussion or participate in that discussion? Could our class sessions be elective? Do all students need the same prerequisites? Do they need required textbooks? Do all students need to progress through the curriculum in the same lockstep manner? What is the role of electives and travel abroad? Again, the questions we might consider as we transform our curriculum are endless, and perhaps what's most important is that we consistently consider new ways in which we might design curriculum to respond to the changes we face. Let's return to the challenges issued by the IOM report on the future of nursing. Certainly, creating curricula that are more adaptive and responses to changes based on new evidence and a changing science base, changes and advances in technology, and changes in the needs of patients in the healthcare system is necessary, but it's not sufficient, is it? Any curriculum we create must also undergo continuous evaluation and improvement. We have a long tradition in conducting rigorous curricular evaluation and using these findings to make changes in the curriculum. We carefully outline our findings in accreditation reports every 8 or 10 years. But if our goal is to alter students' professional identity so that they see improving the care they deliver as part of the work they do, then we must walk the talk. How might we accelerate change and continuously improve our courses and schools as we move forward? As we think about accelerating improvement in nursing education, our practice partners can be very helpful in this work. They've been focusing on accelerating improvement for some time now, and many organizations are becoming so adept at this, it's becoming part of their culture. For instance, let's think about rapid cycle change. In healthcare organizations, rapid cycle change is a process of testing changes on a small scale. Plan, do, study, act, or PDSA. There is a large literature on this process and examples of its use to guide your efforts. I encourage you to explore this and talk to your practice partners about their experiences. Briefly, rapid cycle change helps us learn from small-scale changes so that we can refine and expand our efforts or abandon them based on what we learn. To begin with, think about a change you would like to adopt as you work to embed QSEN competencies in your curriculum. As you think about that change, here's 3 questions that are important to consider. First, what exactly are you trying to accomplish with this change? What change will you make specifically to improve the situation? And how will you know that the change that occurs, if any, is an improvement or not? Now let's look at each of the steps in the PDSA cycle separately to see how this might work. The first step in the PDSA cycle is plan. During this phase, we give very careful attention to the change that's going to occur. What exactly is it that we want to happen? What will we test? Who will need to be involved in this test? What's their role? How will you coordinate those people? Who needs to be informed that this small test of change is underway? When and how will this occur? What's the timing in the semester or in the course that you will need? Will you need simulation facilities, a lab space? Will it occur in the classroom or clinical? And again, who needs to be informed or involved in those changes? How long will the test last? Will you do a single simulation, for instance? Will this be something that you want to monitor over the entire semester or even at the end of the year? What exactly do you expect to happen? What data do you need to determine if a change has occurred or not? How will you collect that data? Who will collect that data? The next step in the PDSA cycle is do. First, of course, ensure that everyone that's going to be involved in this small test of change is clear about their role in the test and what exactly they'll be expected to do. Then we get the test underway. We collect whatever data that we've determined is going to be important to help us know if a change has occurred, and that might be quantitative data or qualitative data. It will be important for you to keep field notes to inform the next PDSA cycle. What are those things that you hadn't anticipated? What are the things that happened that made this test more difficult, or what could have helped it run more smoothly? What things came up that you hadn't thought about collecting data on, but that in hindsight would have been quite helpful? Any notes that you can take as the test is underway will help you in further stages. And of course, as you get done with the doing phase, with the small test of change, it's important to debrief with all of those who've been involved in the change so that you might share your ideas about the improvements that could be made to the test. The next phase of the PDSA cycle is study. Plan, do, study. In study, we actually analyze the data that we've collected. We look at the results and think about what do those results mean. Again, it's very helpful to debrief with the team as you look at the results of your test. What do these results mean for us as teachers? What do they mean for students, for the course, the program, the school? What did we learn from this approach? How did we experience implementing this change? Was it overly time-consuming? Was it easy to do? Were there things that would have improved it? Were there surprises or unanticipated aspects that could help us understand the data in a different way or enter into the next PDSA cycle? And of course, the next step is act. Plan, do, study, act. In this phase, we determine if this approach should be continued, should be expanded, modified, maybe abandoned. What's the next step? How might we improve our next round of testing? What are we learning from this approach, and how might we plan the next test of change? And that's important, isn't it? The next test of change. Part of the continuous improvement process is to repeatedly learn from these small tests of change so that we can rapidly accelerate overall improvement. But of course, all change is not improvement, but all improvement requires change. The importance is for us to continually learn from our efforts to improve our curriculum so that we can continually improve how students are prepared for practice. As we work together to accelerate improvement in our curriculum based on new evidence and a changing science base, changes and advances in technology, and changes in the needs of patients and the healthcare system, we also need to systematically investigate the effects of our efforts. Indeed, the IOM challenges us further by stating, at no time in recent history has there been a greater need for research in nursing education. As healthcare reform progresses, basic and advanced nursing practices are being defined by new competencies, yet virtually no evidence exists to support the teaching approaches used. This is important for us to consider. In other words, PDSA cycles help us rapidly improve our curriculum, but they don't replace the need for research in nursing education. Rather, they inform those efforts. PDSA cycles can help us determine which educational interventions are most promising and ready to be tested on a large scale, across settings and sites, and with multiple methods, so that we can advance the evidence base on which our future pedagogical decisions are made. So we need faculty who are consistently engaging in PDSA cycles and rapidly testing out new approaches to nursing education that can improve our courses and curricula. But we also need a cadre of faculty who are involved in systematically building nursing knowledge about those changes and about the outcomes that are being achieved as this transformation is underway. It's helpful to consider what outcomes we're achieving. And here, if we think about educational innovations as interventions, then very helpful research questions come up for us. So if we consider any of the educational innovations we're considering, how might we begin to ask ourselves, under what conditions are the outcomes that we desire best achieved? How long will these outcomes last once they are achieved? How well do they transfer to practice? You can see how these are important kinds of questions for us to understand how we might use our resources, both faculty resources and financial and material resources, to best support learning that's going to get us to the outcomes that we seek. Similarly, we might look at what outcomes are most significant in guiding our pedagogical decisions, and do we have any reason to believe that these translate to improved patient outcomes? When you think about it, the better prepared nurses are to provide safe quality care, the better patient outcomes should be achieved. How might we begin to investigate if and under what conditions that link occurs? It's critical for the discipline and for every school of nursing to seriously invest in demonstrating the effectiveness, reliability, relevance, and cost-effectiveness of our pedagogies and curricular models, be that through small tests of change or robust systematic nursing education studies. The students who will be teaching and the patients that they'll be providing care for in the future deserve no less. As this series of modules comes to a close, we hope you'll continue to visit the QSEN website. This is a great repository of resources for us as faculty to use as we embed QSEN competencies in our courses, curriculum, programs, and even across programs. We hope you'll continue to contribute the things that you're creating to this repository so that other faculties can take advantage of the insights that you've had and the strategies that you've used that you've found to be successful. There are also other important websites that you should be sure to check out. For instance, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement's Open School. This is an important site for you to be able to not only keep up on advances in quality and safety science, but it also is a way for faculties and students across universities and across disciplines to connect, to work together to improve how students are being prepared for quality and safety, and of course the quality and safety of care being provided to patients. Also, websites such as the Transforming Care at the Bedside initiative sponsored by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Joint Commission's Transforming Healthcare website, and the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality can similarly give you ready access to successful initiatives so that your knowledge of quality and safety continues to grow and keep up with changes in the field, and you can take advantage of those developments in terms of designing cutting-edge experiences for your students. We hope you'll continue to explore these resources and again to share what you're learning with others. Thanks for your attention through these learning modules. We hope that they've been helpful for you, and we wish you great success in embedding QSEN competencies throughout your curriculum. Thank you.